Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today, Rise of the Content Mesh Webcast with Contentful and Gatsby. I just wanted to take a minute to welcome you and also to let you know a couple of announcements. Everyone will be on mute during the webinar, but if you have questions, please enter them in the question window. We will have a few panelists available to answer those questions throughout the webinar, as well as we'll set aside some time at the end for Q&A. So feel free to put all your questions in that window. Also, the webinar will be recorded. So if you miss a portion of the webinar or you want to watch and listen to it later, the recording will be sent to all registrants and posted on Twitter later today. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers. My name is Linda Watkins. I'm Director of Marketing at Gatsby. I am passionate about web technologies and cloud. I formerly worked at Pantheon as well as AWS. I also play the flute. I worked at a flute factory and I perform flute with the Bay Area Rainbow Symphony. So we're also joined by Shai Ruparel. And Shai is a Python developer by heart with a passion for long board games, good jokes, and the staying power to wish you a great day on Twitter every single day. And if you've ever seen Shai's Twitter handle and the images that he's posted, they are a lot of fun. Next, we have Sam Bagwat, who is co-founder and head of Enterprise at Gatsby. Sam is a core contributor and co-founder of Gatsby. Sam writes and speaks on topics like modern website development, React, GraphQL, and open source software. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Sam for his portion of the presentation. And Sam, you want to unmute yourself as well.
Hey there. Really excited to be talking today. The topic that the topic that we're going to be talking about is what it's like to build websites and how that's changed over the last 5 to 10 years. We're going to start from more of a business oriented perspective and then shift over into more of a technical perspective. Fundamentally, as you know, as web developers, as website developers, developing for the web is hard, and it's hard because with millions of websites on the internet, developers have to create compelling experiences to engage audiences, because to bounce, all a user has to do is just type in a few things into their address bar and navigate away from your site. And so what that means, and what is that people are trying to grab attention. We have the rise of brands like Harry's, Dollar Shave Club, Bonobo, Stitch Fix. These brands are disrupting traditional industries. So perhaps you have clients who are these kind of new brands who are trying to gain attention, or e-commerce content. And trying to gain attention. Perhaps your clients are, or the company you work for is in one of these industries, and they're trying to stay relevant in today's age, and show that they're keeping up with the times. What this all means is that the returns to having an incredible web presence are rising. Sites that are maybe a little bit better or differentiated in some way from the competition often can draw a disproportionate share of users, visitors, and revenue. And so with that world that we live in, where people are trying to distinguish themselves as unique, as better, there are these returns to investing in a digital presence. And what that says overall about the internet is that the internet has matured, because it used to be that it was really hard, 10, 15, 20 years ago, just to get content on the internet and establish a web presence at all. And that was, going back, down memory lane, or, back a bit in history, that was how the CMS was born. But today everyone is publishing content, and the challenge is to be in a world, or, work for an organization, or have clients who are in a place where their content is in a lot of different places, and they need to tie it all together. Excuse me. They need to tie it all together. So just to take another thing in that vein, publishing on the web when the CMS was born in the early 2000s was very difficult. So the CMS emerged as a single application that could store content, build sites, and deliver to users. And what that looked like is that the CMS would handle a lot of these key feature areas, whether that was analytics, search, payment, preview. It would be your UI library. You do your development in it. It would handle page creation, forms, all that stuff. And so here over on the left, you see this kind of diagram representing a traditional CMS, and whether that's WordPress, whether that's Drupal, whether that's a more enterprise CMS like Adobe Experience Manager or Sitecore. The world that you live in when you're developing in these environments is that these environments do everything for you by default. But often what's happened recently is that each of these services and each of these components have become their own services. They've become their own best of breed things. We don't really want to use WordPress. We don't want to really develop in WordPress anymore. We don't really want to use Drupal UI Kit. We want to develop in React. We want to develop in Vue. We want to develop in a modern UI language. We don't necessarily want to use the out-of-the-box, forms or search. Maybe we want to use Algolia for search and Auth0 for auth and Segment for analytics, because these services have kind of emerged as better. They've been able to handle these use cases really well. And now we need to somehow take our content from where it lives and plug in these best of breed services and use a great modern UI library so that the development environment is better, right? CMSs, which the traditional full stack CMS does everything, but does not a lot of that well. And we want to move to a world, especially when we're working for clients or for a company that wants to distinguish themselves and stand out on the web. We don't want just a generic website. We want something that stands out. And best of breed, high quality websites demand best of breed tooling. Because if you can't develop and iterate quickly, you can't make a really great website that stands out. So we've been chatting with a lot of folks recently, and we keep hearing similar stories, again and again. A team that's running an e-commerce site's moving away from this Drupal monolith. They're starting to store their products in Contentful, their reviews in Bazaar Voice, which is this sort of review site for user-generated content, and then storing their user information in Auth0. Okay, so question. I think I'm going to turn this over to Linda.
Yeah, and actually I realized I listed the wrong question there, but I will show you the right question. Right now we want to know, what is the most important to you in a website framework? So if you had to choose one, would you choose easy for content creators to use, easy for developers, like leveraging the most modern web technologies, or for performance, a fast optimized site? So go ahead and put your answer in here, and I will wait till we have a good number of responses, and then we'll close the poll. We'll give you just a couple more seconds. All right, so I'm going to close the poll now, where people are getting their last minute votes in. Okay, great. And share results. So it looks like a lot of people are opting for performance, 46%, 39% easy for developers to use, and we probably don't have a ton of content creators on this webinar, because 14% say for content creators. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, so great, thanks, Linda. So I think it's interesting that we kind of had this split. we kind of had this split with a lot of folks. A lot of folks took a lot of time to answer the question, right? It's tough to think about these trade-offs. It's tough to think about who's kind of the person that you want to optimize for when you're building a website, because ultimately, there are these like three stakeholders, content creators, developers, and users that we're when we put together a site architecture, we're trying to optimize for all of them, but often only end up optimizing for one or two. Moreover, this is even more relevant because in each of these areas we're seeing rapid innovation that helps this person have a better and easier workflow. So content creators, we see headless CMSs like Contentful. We see specific CMSs like e-commerce CMSs, tailored CMSs like Salsify. With developers, we see developers wanting to use modern frameworks like React, Angular, Vue, in order to be able to iterate quickly and have a modern website development component-based experience. Ultimately, and this is something that we were talking about before, a modern website experience requires modern tooling, and what that means is that if you're building a digital experience that stands out above the competition, which is something your clients are going to care, your clients and your company will obviously care a lot about, it requires this modern tooling, and so it's fascinating to see that React and Angular have just dominated as a proportion of the JavaScript ecosystem because of all these advances that we've seen, component-based UIs, the virtual DOM, and what this means is that we have a stable place to build on the future. That's a head and shoulders advance above previous, whether that's WordPress templates or Drupal UI kit and kind of previous CMS-based development environments. It's interesting to see that some of the award-winning websites from, for example, the Webbies are being built on modern frameworks, right? Which rather than sort of CMS development experiences. And what this is all coming back to is that in many ways, the Enterprise CMS, that full stack monolithic integrated CMS is 10 plus years out of date. And it's all these advances in the JavaScript ecosystem are simply creating a pressure differential where the development experience is better in the modern JavaScript ecosystem without issues like having to maintain local app service and databases, being able to use a headless cloud CMS, not having to handle bundling, project organization on your own, having these transpiling tools, so on and so forth. We can go really in depth in it, but there's really just been a flood of advances in the modern JavaScript ecosystem that create a better development environment. And so that's the second area, right? So headless CMSs, benefiting content creators, modern development tools and frameworks benefiting developers, and then advances in website performance benefiting site visitors. So performance has always been important, but it's becoming increasingly important, and it's becoming increasingly important because of the rise. So there's a couple of factors, but one of the big ones is the rise of smartphone traffic. So between 2014, looking at this graph a little bit, between 2014 and 2017, mobile traffic rose from 20% of overall traffic to 50%, right? And you can think about the performance characteristics of a user on a smartphone. Maybe they're over a slow connection. Who knows where they are? Maybe it's a 3G. Maybe they get really bad connection even inside their own home. Maybe they're on the go. Maybe they're in a tunnel. Maybe they're on a bridge. Who knows? And then devices that may not be your top of the line iPhone, slow Android devices that take a while to evaluate JavaScript. So suddenly smartphone so with the rise of smartphone traffic, mobile performance becomes a key aspect of it becomes a key aspect of your site of your site performance. So I'm going to turn this back over to Linda to talk about this, to ask a poll question.
Thanks. And again, I had listed the wrong poll question before, so apologies for that. But the right question is showing now. So about how many seconds will you wait for a page to load before bouncing? I know that I appreciate a fast load time, of course. So just trying to get a sense of how long you'll wait before getting frustrated and moving on. So we have several votes coming in. We'll give you a couple more seconds to vote. Once we get to 60% of the viewers voting, we will close the poll. We're at 50% now, so a couple more votes and then we'll show the results. Okay, great. I'm going to close the poll. Okay, so a lot of people will wait a couple of seconds, some even 3 to 5. Those are very patient people in our modern age. But showing a lot of people, bouncing on a website if it takes more than a second or two to load. All right. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, I think this poll illustrates something really crucial, which is that, well, our visitors aren't any more patient than we are, right? If 97% of us are gonna bounce when a site takes over 5 seconds to load, we need to make sure that our sites, load in definitely less than 5 seconds. If almost half of us are gonna bounce, if a site takes more than 3 seconds to load, then we need to make sure that our site loads in less than 3 seconds. Studies have shown that every 100 milliseconds of latency costs 1% of sales, or 1% of visitors if you're building a content site. A lot of times clients will be pouring tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in AdWords and driving folks to the sites that we build. And when those sites are slow, it hurts the bottom line. And we can deliver value by showing that, hey, we can build a fast site. The challenge, of course, is, well, how does a site become fast? Sites actually become slower unless you do anything proactively to make it fast, and it can be difficult to pitch performance and to get performance baked into the budget, because ultimately performance takes time to implement inside traditional website development paradigms, and it's easy to mess up. A website becomes slow by default unless we purposefully, carefully make it fast. So those are all kind of the 3 challenges of building a modern website, right? It's creating experiences that are good for content creators. It's creating development experiences that are good for developers, and it's creating a site performance that's good for site visitors, right? And so ultimately, to create modern website experiences, we need to do all 3 of these things. Gatsby is a tool that lets you do all of these 3 things, and we call this the content mesh, bringing best of breed tools together with modern performance, together with a great development environment, and wrapping it all together into a new stack, like the content mesh. So just to walk through a little bit how this works with Gatsby, like with Gatsby, you get performance out of the box. You can bring content from anywhere, from any CMS or CMSs, and you can use modern development tools. You build your UI in React. So kind of how that works is that Gatsby is a website compiler, and it takes your code and your UI components in React, together with your content, whatever sources you're bringing that from, and it compiles it into it compiles it into a set of files that you can then put on a CDN, which will be globally available. You won't have to deal with app servers and databases to serve your files. Your files will to serve your site. Your site will live on the edge on a CDN, and it will deliver like lightning fast performance. So here's another kind of piece of that, which is that you can, we talked about this, but you can really source from any CMS or any combination of CMSs. So maybe you've got a blog in WordPress and you've got e-commerce in Shopify. Maybe you've got Contentful, but then you also have another internal team working off of a Google Sheet together. You can bring all those content sources together into your website through Gatsby's plugin system with like built-in integrations. You don't have to write the code pulling the data in. That happens out of the box. So that's why it's great for content creators. Gatsby lets you pull your content from where it lives and lets your content creators use the tools that they're most useful, comfortable, and familiar with. At the same time, Gatsby is great for the development team because Gatsby offers modern development tools. You get out of the box React. You get modern sort of bundling, code splitting, transpiling with Webpack and Babel. That all comes out of the box. You get a CLI, dev server, hot reloading, like a nice development environment. And then it's really easy to add these additional pieces of the ecosystem that make development in teams bigger, whether that's linting, formatting, component curation, component libraries, third-party components in React, inspecting your components. Gatsby gives you that experience. And finally, Gatsby offers performance out of the box. So we like to say that there are two different ways that you get performance. You can get delivery optimization, which is what you get when you use a CDN. You move towards files and away from app servers and databases. So Gatsby gives you that because your site lives on the edge close to users. It doesn't have to wait on any DB call to be delivered. And the CDNs are great, and CDNs optimize delivery. But then what's being delivered, the payload, is also optimized. So Gatsby does code splitting. It does prefetching. So if you're clicking on if you're clicking on a link inside your site, that has often been cached by the browser in the background, so it's instantaneous. It inlines critical JS and CSS, which means that you don't have to wait for a blocking call for your page to load. And then there's advanced image loading techniques, which basically show you a preview of the image right away when the page loads, and then when the image comes back, then the full image will come in. That helps your user feel like, hey, this is loading super fast, and I see what this is, and then when the last bit comes in, it's complete, but it feels like ready right away. People have said that Gatsby sites are disgustingly fast. They've used various other adjectives, which I won't repeat, but they're often quite surprised by how incredibly fast Gatsby sites are. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Great, thanks so much, Sam. I'm going to pass the controls over to Shai now. We heard Sam talk about the content mesh, kind of overall trends we see with website development now, as well as more description of Gatsby and how it fits into that overall landscape. And now we're going to hear from Shai about Contentful and how Contentful and Gatsby work together.
Thanks, Linda, and thanks to Sam and Kyle as well for all three of you, and Gatsby for hosting me in this webinar. I'm really excited as well. If you all have any questions, don't hesitate to throw them in the question section of the webinar. And otherwise, let's get started. So I'm Shai. I'm a developer evangelist at Contentful, and I'm really here to talk to you about content management. And Linda has a question lined up for me. What I really want to know is, of you in the audience, who here has used a CMS, like a content management system? We can wait for just a couple seconds.
We'll give people a few minutes. This is an easy question.
Yeah. Cool.
So I assume this means if you currently use a CMS or have used one in the past.
Yeah. I think that's about 20 seconds. So let's see.
All right, we have 60% voted. So I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results real quick.
Yeah, that's about what I expected. Almost everybody has used it. Now, my following question is, who here liked using a content management system?
So another easy yes or no question.
These are my favorite questions when I got quizzes in school, were the easy ones. So
yeah, people have to think about this one a little bit more. Oh, now we're getting some good votes in.
cool.
Okay, we're at 60%, 70%. So I'll go ahead and close this poll.
Yeah, so we've
mixed.
almost, yeah, we've got a strong preference towards no, which is a bit of a flip from last time, and kind of what I expected. And I think there's a strong reason why, you know, content management systems get kind of a bad rap, right? And that's partially because they slow software development down. You know, they make it harder to get things done. It makes it harder to roll stuff out. It's slow and painful for developers. It's rigid and inflexible for editors. You know, it kind of traps things in these silos. And typically when I talk about content management systems and I hear about content management systems, what I'm hearing about is tools that are in this page-centric way of doing things. You are going into your WordPress or your Drupal and you're building a page, and an editor specs out a page, and that data is kind of designed to be seen on the internet and you can't take it anywhere else. You're hosting these giant monolithic apps that have all sorts of things that you have to keep an eye on, and yeah, maybe you could pay someone to manage this stuff for you, but it is a giant solution that, you know, could be vulnerable to issues or security updates or whatever. And also, you know, you have to really learn how the CMS wants you to do things. You are dependent on how the content management system is built and how the content management system allows you to engage with it. For example, you know, you might have to learn PHP and specific, like, you know, interactions of PHP to add functionality into WordPress that, you know, might not exist, which can be a bummer. And I think these are three, like, totally valid and totally major problems, but I don't think they're actually the worst thing with most traditional content management systems. I think the worst offender of all of them is actually WYSIWYG. And if you think about it, WYSIWYG is amazing for editors. Editors can go into these things, they can, you know, configure how it looks, but when developers see that, what we're really doing is we're interpreting HTML. And we're really kind of merging the content and the look in these WYSIWYG editors. If you dig into the HTML of a WYSIWYG editor, you see there's all sorts of crazy CSS going on there. There's all sorts of additional spans and divs and unnecessary HTML elements that get thrown in there, and it's just kind of a mess. And when you know, really kind of make it so content and look are the same thing, you really force yourself with that HTML to only allow it to be used by a web browser. You can't take that to your cell phones, you can't use it on your smart fridges, and you're really just breaking portability. So just to kind of summarize that, WYSIWYG has a couple disadvantages. It's too flexible. It mixes those content and look paradigms. It's really easy to screw up for your editors, and you want HTML as the input, which I think as a developer is really rough to work with. And you know, you might hear this and think, you know what, I'm going to just build my own content management system that fixes these problems for me. But really, you know, I don't think most people think that building you know, a brand new application that you have to maintain is the solution to all of the problems. And also, like, you know, who has the time to maintain and keep things like that running? And that's, I think, largely where Contentful kind of comes in. So we have a different attitude to managing content. We like to think of ourselves more as a content infrastructure. So we're here to empower and enable developers. So rather than hosting a monolithic application that your editors are kind of familiar with, we give you your content through just a standard API. We don't render it. We pass it on to you, so you can build your website however well you damn please. Because let's be honest, there's a reason that developers are out there, and that's because they're great at making things and creating things, and you should be able to render the content as you need. So when I'm talking about Contentful, really what I'm talking about is this idea of structured content that we pass on to you, that your developers can know and expect and then build around, providing an editing experience that your non-technical folks need to be successful, because they're never going to be able to successfully edit Markdown. And I don't think it's realistic to expect, a person that doesn't have developer experience to learn it or to hire them with the expectation that they already have Markdown skills. And also, it's much faster to split the content management piece away from the rest of your application, and really, make it so you have all the functionality, all the ability to build whatever functionality you need to into your applications. So Contentful has 4 major kind of APIs that we provide: our Deliver API, our Preview API, our Management API, and our Images API. And I can talk a little bit more about those later on. But really, I kind of want to show you a practical example of what I mean with Contentful and kind of what it's like to use it. So for me to give you an example website, I need to take a small tangent. So full disclosure about me, I'm really into longboard games, like Linda mentioned earlier in the talk. Along with that bald gentleman on the left, I help organize a group in New York that plays this game called Twilight Imperium. It's a really long board game. It takes about 14 hours. And we have a group of people in New York of about 30 people that are interested in playing at least once a month. So we're usually running about 4 or 5 of these games every month. December is going to be really exciting for us because we're going to tally all the scores, and the top 6 are going to have like kind of a showdown match to figure out who the best person at this board game is in New York. And I am currently in the top 6, so hopefully I make it to the finals, but it's a little hit or miss right now depending on the December game. So I went ahead and I just built a dumb website to kind of help us organize the games. You can go to ti4.nyc. It's pretty simple. It has some information about our group. It has the logs of some of our games, has some contact stuff so you can reach out to us, and then just some information about how to get involved. And this is a pretty cool site, right? But full disclosure, I'm not a front-end developer. I did use a port of a HTML5 up theme, a starter that was converted into Gatsby. And the stack of this website is a Gatsby website. It's deployed on Netlify, and the content is provided by Contentful. So let's dig into that About page. We've got a bunch of kind of, I think, pretty common things for a website. There's a title up top, there's a feature image, there's some text with some links in them, and there's also a slug, which kind of helps you hit that route. So in Contentful, when I was creating this page, what I did was I defined something called a content model. Now, a content model is kind of similar to a database in that it has defined values. So as a developer, you can go in and say, I expect any content model of a type component to have these things: a title, a slug, an image, some copy, and then the order that it shows up in the website. And then an editor, so in this case, Sean, my bald friend, who unfortunately is not a programmer, is able to go in and he's able to create this page. He's able to fill this out, set the image, upload it. Doesn't matter what size image he uploads, because Contentful can do the conversion and make sure that the images that we're providing are appropriate and scaled appropriately. And he's able to type things out in an editing interface that he can, hover over something, click the link button, type in the link, and it'll work. So that's kind of the data. And now when I request that data, Contentful is going to return it to me through our JSON API. So this is a standard GET request that we make to our content delivery API that returns a JSON object that is just the data that me as the developer defined in the content model, Sean as the editor has filled out, and now the application has ingested. So this is just the CDA, the content delivery API that we're using here. Now we're in Gatsby. I'm going to go ahead and configure the Gatsby source Contentful plugin in the Gatsby app. Gatsby is going to take that JSON, it's going to hit the Contentful APIs and take all of that information and convert it into the GraphQL implementation that Gatsby uses. It is something a little different from the Contentful GraphQL implementation that we're currently in beta, but it is a plugin available that helps bridge that gap between Contentful and Gatsby. And so now that Gatsby has that data, I can pull it up in graphical. From graphical, I can write my queries and figure out, how do I get access to that data. I can take those queries and I can, plug them into Gatsby, take that data and pass it over to my rendering function. And now that I have that data, I can render the page, I can build the site, and then for this case, I'm going to go ahead and also throw it up on Netlify. I'm going to provide Netlify with my, appropriate API keys and set up some webhooks on Contentful, which will then trigger anytime we hit a publish event, and that'll deploy our website for us. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a quick practical example of this. On Netlify, I've hooked up that the code base. I've configured everything. And so in this project, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change one of the images. So Sean is going to go in, change it from a fleet to a flagship, hit publish. Netlify is going to pick up that change through the Contentful webhooks, and it's going to cause a rebuild. That rebuild is going to take just a little bit. And then when we go back to the Twilight Imperium website and we refresh the page, that image should have updated. So the site is live now, Netlify is all finished, and we refresh, and we're done. And there's our new image. And that's great. Connecting the content model and the data up to Gatsby was fairly seamless. In terms of stack, what this is really looking like is Sean is hitting the content infrastructure, making the pages that he needs, changing the pages as he needs to. I'm building the Gatsby site. I'm checking my code into GitHub. That's going. Both of those things are going up to the build server. So if any of those things change, it re-triggers the build server on Netlify. And then Netlify, when it's done, will deploy it out to its CDN. So it is living on the edge. And so that way, when a user wants to get that site, they always get the most up-to-date version as fast and as performant as they can. And more abstractly, what that really looks like is editors hitting the content infrastructure and developers working with the source control in parallel successfully on that stack, which I think is really exciting. And so that code is all up on GitHub if you're interested in kind of digging into it. And there's a lot of Contentful starters for Gatsby specifically that are out there that are also really great as well. I think there's really great documentation on kind of both the Gatsby sides and the Contentful sides that you can dig into. So I really kind of want to actually take a quick second to talk a little bit more about the experience of developing software and the experience of using that software. So we're kind of on the same page about how we can handle content using Contentful, but both developers and editors do need to engage with that content infrastructure. And I think we can do a lot of stuff to make it better. And I think something to keep in mind as we create websites and create projects that people are working with is that the way that editors and developers evolve and update applications is totally different, right? So traditionally, an editor is going to draft something probably in Google Docs or Word. That document is going to go to someone that gets copy reviewed and edits, and that's completely before that even gets to the website. Maybe it needs to go to legal. They're going to go ahead and want to put it up on the website, and they're going to want to see it. They're going to want to preview it. And then once all of those things are kind of cleared, then it hits production. Whereas a developer's experience is going to be pretty different, but it's going to use some of those same words. So a developer is going to spin up a copy of the source code on their local machine. They're going to build a feature or fix a bug or do whatever they need, all locally. When that's ready, maybe it'll go to a QA stage. A QA is going to check it and do what they need. It'll get pushed out to staging, where the entire organization can preview it and check it. And then it'll get pushed out to production. And we're using, that word preview in two places. There's both editorial preview and developer preview, but they mean different things. They mean really different things here. For a developer, preview is largely, does this work? Whereas for an editor, it's, does this look right? And I think when you kind of combine these two workflows, you really kind of push yourself into the danger zone. This area where, editors don't quite understand the software workflow, and software engineers don't necessarily manage to bring the content back up to the stack. And so I think that is something to really keep in mind as you build solutions, is that the words might be the same, but the experiences are totally different. So let's talk about improving the editor experience. And I think what you get out of the box is really great, but with a little bit of work, we can really make the experience better. And when I'm talking about improving the editor experience, I'm really talking about improving Sean's experience. I want Sean, my non-technical friend and co-organizer, to really be able to use the content management solution and be successful. So an example of this is that Sean wants a custom field type, and I don't think that's an isolated feeling. So with our board game, we have a lot of information that we try to track. Who is at the table? There are 6 players. How many points did they score, and what faction were they? And unfortunately, for whatever reason, Contentful and our product team has decided that building a dedicated Twilight Imperium tracker that gets rolled out to all of the Contentful customers is probably not the best use of our engineering resources, which I have strong feelings about. So in fact, I just went ahead and built my own. Yeah, so I built my own using our UI extensions feature. So this looks kind of like a natural thing that fits into our standard web app. And it's using our UI extensions framework, which is really great. It's an SDK that we provide everyone. It's a feature that enables you to upload HTML to Contentful, which then gets rendered into an iframe on our website. So let's dig into this extension really quickly. So what this is actually just a wrapper for our JSON field. So we have a few standard fields, a text field, number field, reference fields, and we also have a JSON field. So if I turn this UI extension off, really what it is just standard JSON data. And me as a developer, I totally get how this works. I feel completely comfortable editing this, but this isn't necessarily something that Sean is comfortable in doing. If we pull this data up in graphical and have Contentful pass it through, it comes out as a standard object, which we can work with and is, I think, pretty familiar, kind of a standard thing that we can use. So the way our UI extensions work is, at the end of the day, kind of looks something like this: a HTML file that stores, the styling and the form of what things should look like, and then the JavaScript that manages the logic, and then a configuration file which defines what the names are and the IDs, and also what fields that the UI extension will interface with and work with. So the config file for this is pretty simple. It's just an outline of what it is and saying that it works with our object field. The form is also a pretty standard form. It's using some of our classes in Contentful to kind of hook into the Contentful SDK. It asks for a name for each player, a score for each player, and then what faction were they. And then down in the script section, there's a thing that grabs all that data, a function that grabs that data when any changes are made, and then sets the field over on Contentful. And then there's a simple get data function which just kind of does a for loop with all the information. Now that we've created that UI extension, we can push it up to Contentful. We can go into Contentful and we can create a JSON field and set the appearance to our new UI extension. And that's it. So Sean is able to now hit create a game, log in, and edit JSON data with this kind of curated, guided experience that he really needs to be successful, which I think is really great. And then Gatsby is able to take that data and also do what it needs to do to render it out to the site. So now there's a game log up on our site which you can dig into, and you can see if I'm full of shit and I'm actually good at the game or I'm not. So so Sean is really happy because he can spend more time doing other stuff and he doesn't need to worry, has he taken the site down, which is, I think, really cool way that the two of us are able to, I'm able to create an experience for him that enables and empowers him to be successful. So that code is also all up on GitHub, and there's all sorts of other UI extensions that you can use. It's not necessarily just for forms. You can interface with all sorts of third-party vendors like Shopify to do search for items or all sorts of other things. There's a great extension that one of my coworkers built that is just a trigger to build a build button on Netlify. Their editors wanted to do preview, and preview with static sites can sometimes be a little complicated, so they just added a button for their editors to just hit build, and then a minute and a half later they're able to go take a look at the preview site and confirm what things are looking like. And that really means that what this feature does is it lets Contentful be friends with other vendors, which I think is really cool. And there's all sorts of pre-built extensions in our marketplace that you can check out as well. And so I don't think I'm going to talk about developer experience today. I think I'm running a little over time, but there's all sorts of additional stuff that you can do to really improve the developer experience using these systems as well. That's pretty much it. I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to hand it back to Linda. And if you're interested, all of these slides are up on my GitHub at shy/talks. So.
Great, thanks, Shai. And we are getting some questions coming in that Sam and Kyle are getting to as well. So keep your questions coming. I'm just going to take a few minutes to go over a few case study examples. Then we'll have a demo of a new product that Gatsby is launching called Gatsby Preview. And then we'll have a little bit of time for more questions as well. So I wanted to give you two examples of great sites that are Contentful and Gatsby sites. The first one is Flamingo. It is body care for women. It's a product by Harry's, and it's at shopflamingo.com. This is what the website looks like. Really beautiful imagery, a great flow to it, nice kind of image resolution and everything. So this is an e-commerce site having products for women. And they, when they were looking to build this site, this is a totally new site. They were preparing for a big product launch. They knew they were going to have to handle lots of traffic spikes because they were preparing a big PR push, and they didn't want any room for failure. Like obviously, you don't want your best day to become your worst day. If you have a product or a website that goes viral and lots of hits, you don't want your site to go down. So they wanted to make sure they built it with performance in mind right from the beginning. They're working on a tight timeline, which can be typical for doing a product launch. They knew most of the website visitors would be on mobile because of their experience with Harry's website. And they needed performance out of the box. So, you know, they didn't want to spend a lot of time kind of fine-tuning the performance. They needed development tools that would give them that performance right away. And in fact, Tim Brown, who's the senior software engineer at Harry's, said that we wanted to focus on performance at the beginning of the project because that's easier than trying to make a built website perform later. So, you know, he's had plenty of experience working with websites, building websites, and he knew he needed to get the performance right from the start on this one. So as a result, they launched this site last month. It was very successful. They were able to get a lot of PR attention around it, lots of website traffic the first week that they launched. They said it's 5 times as fast compared to the other Harry's websites that they have, and as well as their competitors. And it is mobile optimized. They were able to get performance out of the box with Gatsby. And also it's very important for them to have their content creators able to update content on a regular basis. So that's why they went with Contentful as well. It made it a lot better and easier experience for the content creators. So with Contentful and Gatsby, they were very happy with this new site. And Johnny, who's an engineering manager at Harry's, who worked on this project also, said, as an e-commerce site, performance, meaning search engine optimization and conversion, is super important, and Gatsby takes care of this for us. And one more quote from them: we were able to allow newer teammates to be part of on-call for the launch because Gatsby made it so easy to maintain. So Tim was mentioning this point around having the website hosted on the edge or on the CDN. He didn't have to worry about traffic spikes because he knew the CDN would handle it. And this is kind of speaking to that paradigm shift that Sam had mentioned earlier on in the webinar about a new modern way to build websites. Hosting on the edge really can give you peace of mind, especially if you have a lot of traffic spikes for your website. So the second case study example I wanted to share is UFit Health Clubs. They're at ufit.com, and they have a lot of regional locations. This is their website. They use their website mainly for lead conversion. So they want people to join the gym and to sign up for a free trial. They also get a lot of views on their specific region pages. So you could go in, find a club, put in your zip code, for example, and find the health club that's nearest to your location. So when they started looking at doing a site rebuild, their old site was very slow. they had a 60% bounce rate, and they knew they were losing customers because the biggest way for them to get customers was through their website, but yet an underperforming website was meaning they were losing customers and revenue. Also, it was a really poor experience on mobile devices, and mobile device traffic is just increasing and becoming even more important today. So doing their site rebuild with Contentful and Gatsby, they were able to increase their lead conversion by 60%. So just a huge improvement in lead conversion right away just by doing the site rebuild. They had a over 20% increase in organic traffic. A lot of that was due to having their region pages, the pages that are specific to a gym in a specific area. Those were more optimized, and then Google was able to search and make that organic search a lot easier. They also increased their accessibility score, which also improved their Google search ranking, and their pages a lot more mobile optimized. So Zach, who's the director of digital marketing at UFIT, said the website went from being a burden to a strategic tool we use to capture leads and generate ROI. So when he came on board with UFIT, he recognized right away that they needed an improvement to their website, and then was able to get that improvement with Contentful and Gatsby. Okay, so to get started with Gatsby or Contentful, just go to gatsbyjs.org, or for Contentful, you can go to contentful.com. They both work very well together, but that's where to get started. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar has been recorded, and the slides and the recording will be available later today. I will send a link to those to all the registrants by the end of day today. So thank you for joining us today. Thanks to the speakers, Sam and Shai, and for Kyle in the background helping to answer some of the questions. Like I mentioned before, in about a week, we'll also have a follow-up blog post where we will get to any questions that we weren't able to during the webinar. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining, and hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar.